And good evening, everyone. Welcome to Arcane Radio. It's October, and I'm Sean, the Fork Chop Forker, alongside my good friend, Lon Strickler. Lon, how you doing tonight, good man?
Hanging in there, man.
That's all we
Hanging
can
in there.
do is hang around.
Sir.
We got a great guest tonight on the program. Stan Gordon is going to be joining us later. Legendary Pennsylvania researcher and investigator of the unexplained, Stan Gordon, joining us at about 10:30 for a good interview tonight. Going to be talking about the stranger cryptids of Pennsylvania. But I guess, Lon, before we get into that, we got our own stuff to talk about tonight. Our canine friend made his appearance again here not too long ago.
Yeah, this Central Pennsylvania bipedal canine investigation is continuing as we promised. We got rained out this past weekend because of the hurricane and tropical storm and whatever. But everybody had rain this weekend, so they pushed it back up. So it's going to be the week of the 23rd. I think he's got it.
Yeah, it was kind of rainy around here. I'm not gonna.
Yeah,
lie.
it was wet everywhere. I mean, it was down here was soaked. So anyway, we got and I'm not going to be specific, but we got another report up in Schuylkill County, in the area of Shamokin. So that's two we've got from that area now. The dog man or whatever you want to call him is making himself known, and actually this sighting was, it was, another one of those where this thing was seen on the side of the road again, and I'm just wondering if what it's doing is picking up roadkill. It may seem that way. I don't know. There was nothing specific about that, but I've heard other reports in other areas about these things being seen on the side of the road. So maybe that's what they're doing. If that's the only way we get to see them, well, that's at least we get to see them then.
I don't want to run into one eating something alongside the road. Gross.
Well, especially if you're driving and run up on this thing, you know. So, so we're looking forward to that, and seeing what we can, see what we can find, see what the team can find. We had a little something happen this past weekend, that we had our fingers and toes crossed, but it just didn't work out. We thought we might have had some good evidence, but it kind of petered out on us. So
yeah, an exciting 24 hours anyhow that we were on pins
I
and needles.
thought we had something unusual, but
So did I. Didn't work out that way, but it was interesting nonetheless.
yeah, it had us going. So we keep at it and keep taking reports. And like we said, if anybody's got a report, let us know about it. You can contact me at Fans of Monsters, or you can contact Butch over at U4 Cop, or UFO Researchers of Pennsylvania, Research Center of Pennsylvania, U4 Cop. That's it.
U4cop.com.
Yeah.
And Butch will respond because Butch is pretty much the man. He gets the job done.
Yep. He's a great investigator. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And Butch is going to be joining us on the show in the near future, so that'll be interesting, and we know what we'll be talking about.
That pesky, mangy dog man.
It is. And of course, Stan's going to be on with us tonight, so we're going to talk to him about this. And he's in this case that we had out in Denver. He referred that to me, and that turned out to be something very interesting. So, and they're still working on that. Jack, and the JC are still investigating it, and there's some areas out there outside of Denver that they're looking at, and apparently there have been some more sightings. So we'll see.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we've really gone to great lengths to get information about this creature, but that Denver sighting is what pretty much the genesis of all these citing reports that we've been receiving and that you and Butch and the team have been investigating. And I can't wait to get out there and actually do some investigating on this myself.
Yeah, I had Linda Godfrey and I had both been getting a lot of reports out of southern Canada, southern Ontario, Alberta, Manitoba, and they were. It was interesting how they were bunching up there, especially in southern Ontario. But then all of a sudden, we got this thing out in Denver, and for whatever reason, that information came out. Then there was another sighting near Denver, and Jack was checking that out. Then all of a sudden, now that we did have this, like I said, we had this thing last year from Penfield that got Butch received. And then we got another one near Penfield that was sent to me, and just right after that, it just blew up. So what I think's been going on, we've been putting it out there, and then people who have seen these things are starting to come forward, which is great. The more we get, the merrier, and it's something we need to document, and that's what we're trying to do. And hopefully, we're going to come up with something tangible to prove these things are not just figments of imagination. So, we'll keep at it.
It's a pledge to keep on at it.
Yep. So, as far as this week goes, other than continuing with that, I only got one decent report this week, and I think it had something to do with that hurricane for whatever it was worth. It really didn't kind of pan out the way people thought it was.
Thankfully.
Yes, very, very thankfully. But down in McClellanville, South Carolina, a gentleman and his wife had an encounter down there, and I think the reason these two Bigfoot were on the move was because of the weather. But anyway, let me read this. He said, "I got your email off the internet. We live in McClellanville, South Carolina, near the high school. My wife and I were out back last evening moving lawn chairs and a table into the garage. There was enough light to see into the woods. It was raining steady, and I heard a few grunt sounds coming from the woods. So I looked out the door and saw two hairy forms quickly walking through the trees about 100 foot away. Now, as I caught a glimpse of them, the biggest one turned, stopped walking, and stared at me. That's when I realized it was a Bigfoot. For a few seconds, it just stood there looking at me. The other Bigfoot kept walking. Then it shook its head and let out a grunt and took a few steps in my direction. I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me. My wife didn't see them and wondered why I was acting like I was, and she still doesn't believe what I saw. So the big one was very tall. I'd say over 8 foot and huge. It was covered in ruddy brown hair and a dark colored face. The other one was a few feet shorter. I don't think I ever been so scared. I've never seen anything like that in these woods or anywhere in this area. We lived here for 27 years, and I know the outdoors well. I went back out this morning, but there were no footprints, even though it's muddy back there. All this rain may have covered up any tracks. We had something bust a garage window out a few months ago, but I had no idea who or what did it. Now I believe it was one of these Bigfoot. Thanks for reading my email." So I called the witness that afternoon, and he had contacted a local Bigfoot group, I was going to give him a referral anyway. So they're going to investigate whoever it is. So he didn't have any additional information to the original account. So that's all I got out of that. So maybe I'll hear something. I don't know. So it's just seeming to me that they seem to be hightailing out for some reason.
Well, we had 20 inches of rainfall there since last Friday.
Yeah, I know. So now there was a gentleman who contacted me after he read this and said his family were actually some of the founding fathers of that town, McClellanville. And he said that report doesn't surprise him because of the location. It's right in the middle of a national forest or a state forest or whatever, but it's got a lot of swampy area, and it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. He said it's near the coast, but I don't know, it's one of those coastal forests or whatever down in Carolina. So, I think I know where the area. I think I know the area or where the area is. I mean, it's just north of Charleston. So, yeah, it does seem that it's a pretty remote area. So, maybe he did see something. Well, I think he did. It does seem kind of unusual that the thing took a stance like that and grunted and moved toward him. That's kind of unusual, especially if they were trying to get out of the area.
Do you remember that episode of Paranormal Witness where they had the family at the farm that was surrounded by these large canid type creatures?
Yeah, that was that case that Linda investigated. That was up
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Maine.
I just watched that again, and
Oh,
by
did you?
God, what a situation!
Yeah, that was kind of scary. I think that guy was lucky he didn't get attacked. I really am.
If you folks haven't seen it, you need to watch. I think it's the second season of Paranormal Witness. I don't know the name of the episode per se, but if you go through and look at the synopsises of each episode, you'll see the encounter that we're talking about, and it is a hair-raising encounter.
Yeah, I don't know what they were. I mean, they were bipedal canines. I don't know what exactly they were though, but they were big and they were scary and they were very aggressive. And apparently, they had gone down in the woods and found uh, I don't know what they were, tunnels in the woods where they thought these things were living at.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It is a weird story, but like I said, yeah, Linda investigated. She told me about it before the thing came on TV, and much of it was dramatized, but because they are going to add a little bit to it. But I don't know. From what I understand, it was pretty close to what actually happened.
It was exciting.
Yeah, yeah, it was. Yeah, it kind of had me thinking there for a bit. Like I said, we got Stan coming on tonight, and Stan actually posted some new information on his website today. And he's got a specific whatever, I don't even know what this is, that was reported to him from where else? Butler County. And we'll have him talk about it. He he wrote to me and said, "Have you ever heard or seen anything like this?" I said, "No. I don't know what that is." So, but we'll let him tell you about it. It was pretty strange. So,
No ruin and surprise.
no, so and we want to talk to Stan about some of these Dogman sightings as well, and this state, as a whole, even though it hasn't been as many as we're getting now, I mean, this phenomena has been going on here for, oh God, for at least a century or so.
Oh, a long time. Definitely
They've been
a long
reporting
time.
this stuff for a long time.
Since
Yep.
we've
So
really
that's
been talking about it, though, these sighting reports have taken off.
yeah. Well, and that's good. I mean, at least the words are getting out there, and we're getting people that are coming out and not afraid to report it. And I think that has a lot to do. I mean, people, God, I'd be quite honest with you, if I saw one, I don't think I'd want to report it. I got to give people credit for doing it. I really do.
Well, it's not like it's just a Bigfoot report.
Well,
These things are
and
scary.
that's something Butch and I were talking about the other day. You know, we get all these Bigfoot reports in Pennsylvania. Of course, we see the reports when they're filed with Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society.
Mhm.
As soon as they're filed, they come right to everybody in the group. But how many of these supposed Bigfoot sightings may actually be canids?
That's a good
Something to
question.
think about because
Don't know.
some of them, some of the descriptions could very well be that. It's something to think about. Actually I started going back and looking through all the reports I had received over the years, and I did find one that may actually be not a Bigfoot, but an actual upright canid. So, you know, it's possible, I assume.
Well, it definitely is possible. It's just not something that we've actively been looking for or something we've been trying to gather more detail on until recently.
Linda and Stan have probably been about the only two researchers that have really concentrated on that. And of course, JC as well. But it's not a cryptid that I don't know. It did make the top five, I guess. Everybody talking about Bigfoot, and then we get all this flying humanoids and pterosaurs, flying reptilian type beings, and but the Dogman thing kind of took a back seat to some of that, but it's picking up. And is there a reason behind it? I don't know. Possible, but I just think more people are coming forward. I think people have seen these things, but they've just been afraid to come forward.
Have we had anything in the spiritual realm come to light recently? Any new and exciting reports come that way?
I haven't received much of anything. That's been really slow. Uh, I'm still working with people from some of the older reports. But the one I had up in Pennsylvania, that kind of worked itself out. She's not been bothered now for about 2 months, and she was very relieved because God, this thing has been bugging her for the last 30 years. And what it was, I really can't put a finger on exactly what it was. All I know was it was some type of entity that was in a way malevolent. But it was basically what I call a trickster. It had something to do with uh, Obe religion, Creole religion, some type of Creole religion. I'm not going to come out and say it was voodoo, though. I guess you could say it could be somewhat related to that. Uh, but we did a lot. I did a lot of digging on it and did a lot of research and consulted a few people. And I think the things that we did kind of stopped this thing in its tracks. And a lot of this, and I told my clients, look, you've got to keep an open mind on this. Some of the stuff might sound batshit crazy to you that I tell you, but you're gonna have to keep an open mind, and you got to remain positive. That's an imperative. So, she took it to heart. The client took it to heart, and she's had some personal issues as well that she's getting straightened out as well. So, it all goes hand in hand. But I think, but as far as this entity, it hasn't been bothering her. She's getting sleep now, which is something she hadn't been getting. So,
I think it's important
it
that
worked
you.
out.
I think it's important that you put that out there. Someone experiencing these things to remain positive. Once the negativity sets in, it seems that these forces just suck it up like a sponge.
Yeah, it compounds it.
It's nuts. And it just, really aggravates and increases the abilities or the intensities of these attacks from whatever this entity is.
It's and a lot of these type of incidents, the clients themselves can do a lot to help themselves. Uh, Not only remaining positive, but also using a few tools and affirmations and such to kind of lessen the effect. it may sound simple when you talk about it. If we're talking about like it we are now, it doesn't seem simple to the client at the time, but it takes a little bit of I almost got to train them sometimes. The clients, you almost got to put them through like entity 101 class, to explain everything to them and to explain what they should and should not do. And it does seem to help. And of course, with these types of things, there's always an aftercare with it. And
Hmm.
if you go back to the old ways, you're gonna get yourself in trouble most of the time. Again, so it's I'd say 90% of these oppressions, and that's what it is. It's an oppression, are caused by something the client may have done inadvertently, or So when it happens, then sometimes it does increase or remains the same. You get the attachment, and then you're really starting to have a problem. Um, over the last couple of years, I've received a lot of attachments more so than I had before that. But for whatever reason, a lot of this is seeming to me to be lessening now. Now I don't know if it's because of the time of year, and I'll be honest with you, summer is usually slow. It seems around the holidays, and I guess when people are home or with their families, and they're not out running around as much as they would be during the summer months. I think they notice things more,
Hmm.
and that's normally when some of this stuff crops up. So I'm quite certain I'm going to be getting calls within the near future for something, for some type of activity. And we just go with it. But my success rate with people has been pretty good, and I don't. I mean, there's a lot of factors involved with that, but
Proofs in the
I'm
pudding.
not gonna sit here and pat myself in the back, but it there are a lot of factors involved. But it does take the biggest thing is an open mind by the client and being positive.
Well, there you go. Words of wisdom from Lon Strickler. And for next week's affirmations, no, I'm just kidding. But no, you make a good point. And, any little bit of information you can share with folks, I'm glad they appreciate. When I was doing an investigation down in outside of Pittsburgh, I don't want to give too much of the area away. When myself and the team arrived, just the clients were in such a bad state in terms of where their marriage was at. They bickered and fought in front of us to the point where like we're uncomfortable. So
Yeah,
before I really did any kind of investigating, I really recommended that they get professional marriage counseling. That whatever they were about to go through, if they were going through anything, and if it was as intense as she said it was, that they're going to need all the help they can get from people that aren't paranormal investigators. I'm not a marriage counselor. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I don't want to be in a one of those bad situations, if you know what I'm talking about.
yeah.
So it was very uncomfortable for us. And after we left that night and we spoke our piece, we were never contacted by them again.
Mm.
It was sad.
Well, maybe that's all they needed. Maybe that's what they did. And dysfunction in a family can really lend to a lot of this stuff, and I've seen it a
Oh
lot of
yeah,
times.
most definitely.
And raw emotion is it's some powerful stuff. You know, you say raw emotion. Well, hell, look at uh, all these domestic abuse and domestic things that problems happen. We just had something in the paranormal community not long ago, and where a husband and wife died was murder suicide, and that's that raw emotion is just really palpable, and it, if there is a entity in there, or if it's something hanging around, they feed off of that, and it just makes things worse. And of course, unless you get your ducks in a row and start acting civil, a lot of times it just won't go well. Yeah,
Well, I think it's
yeah,
time to break.
yeah. Let's take a break, bring Stan on. Let's get this ship going.
Excellent. All right, folks, stick around. We'll be. And folks, welcome back, Arcane Radio. Sean, the Fort Chop Forker, Lon Strickler, and our guest tonight, Stan Gordon. Stan, how you doing? Thanks for joining us.
We're doing great, guys. Good to be on the program again.
Our pleasure. Folks, if you're not familiar with Stan Gordon is an author, an investigator, a longtime investigator. Stan, how long have you been investigating the unexplained in Pennsylvania and just, pretty much everywhere?
Well, only 56 years this year.
Just
Started back in 1959 when I was 10 years old, but I actually began doing in-the-field investigations back in 1965 after the Kecksburg incident, and I've been out in the field ever since that time, working on thousands of UFO cases, hundreds of cryptid cases, and all kind of other phenomena, and it never ends. I mean, I get calls in here almost daily on current and past reports. My hotline's been open since 1969, and between the emails I get and the calls coming in, it's just amazing what's going on out there that the public has no idea of.
Boy, that's not the truth.
Definitely.
There's a lot of stuff rolling around Pennsylvania. Yeah, I mean, Stan, you've been doing this now for over 50 years. I knew that. You're kind of the authority on the anomalous activity in the Keystone State, and you just put out your third case book titled "Astonishing Encounters." Real interesting stuff. How's
Yeah,
how the sales going?
I really don't know. I have heard a lot of reports since then. Been out about a month, and
Yeah.
I've been doing some events, and around here people were interested in it, and so it's going to take a little time. But I think as people hear about it, they'll find there's an interest in it because it has some very, very strange, unusual cryptids. A lot of stuff in there are cases that people have never heard of before or not well known, and it's not just your Bigfoot and Black Panthers and Thunderbird reports, which are some very strange ones in that book. So there's a lot of other really weird entities and creatures a lot of people never even heard of before.
Yeah, well, let's get into one of those. We you had a report you put on your website today, and you directed to me and asked me if I had ever seen anything like this. And I'll be quite frank, there was something new to me. So why don't you tell everybody what's going on with this thing on Butler County?
Right, I'll read the report, and they can look at it on my website as well.
Okay.
But this occurred, I talked to the witness, did an extensive interview on September 30th, and the witness was very reluctant to really talk about it. Was still, even though we were discussing it, she was still really afraid I was going to, I think, laugh at her, not believe her, because she couldn't believe it herself. But very credible. It's an area where there's been a lot of history of other strange phenomena for many, many years up in Butler County, north of Pittsburgh. But it occurred in late August or around the first week of September of this year. And this is 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's daylight. And she's riding down this rural road in eastern Butler County, and she's just leisurely driving through this area, and she's focusing on the road ahead, but looking to her right and left, looking at a stream to her right, and there's woods off to the left. But suddenly, about 15 to 20 feet away in front of her, and about three-quarters of the way across the road, the witness sees something that was really hard for her to describe, moving from right to left ahead of the vehicle. And she first thought it was a deer, but then quickly realized it wasn't like anything that she had ever seen before, ever heard of before. And that was because the first feature that caught the attention of the witness looked similar to the head of a deer. However, the head was angled straight up. And the head was not real pointy. It narrowed at the top and then rounded off. The body was similar in color to a deer and appeared to be between 4 to 4.5 feet tall, but the body appeared smooth and did not have any apparent hair. The being was only observed from the side and never looked towards the car. No details could be seen on the face because of that. The arms looked to be very short and out of proportion to the rest of the body. The arms were held very close to the chest area. The hands were very small and gave the impression that they were either being held together her possibly holding something. The witness found it hard to describe, but there appeared to be something hanging down, possibly some type of fabric that was covering around the leg area, and no legs or feet could be observed. But the driver said this being glided above the roadway. And even stranger was that behind the head, an odd effect was noticed. And according to what the witness tried to explain to me, she said it looks sort of like time-lapse picture, like in a cartoon when the character is moving so fast the body can't keep up with it. The witness commented that it looked like the head portion was losing streaks of body matter as it glided across the road. So within a couple of seconds, the car reached the location on the road where the creature had been gliding. The driver looked all around, but the being was nowhere in sight and was not seen again. The witness was stunned, could not understand how this creature could be gone in seconds. The entire observation lasted maybe 7 to 8 seconds. The witness also mentioned that it was unusual that the creature wasn't seen as it came from the right side of the road, was only first seen when it was already gliding about 3/4 of the way across the road ahead. So it's rather strange, but it does have some similarities of other cases I've looked into, and I'm sure you've heard of these, but I have, and I've mentioned some of my books. We have reports of these gliding or floating beings. Some have been reported, like one was reported up in Fayette County a number of years ago, gliding above a field. And there have been other reports of these things. Sometimes they're kind of glowing or luminous. One case going back to 1972, I mentioned my Silent Invasion book, was a strange incident in a home where this being was appearing to one member of family and then to another one. And this being had no legs and would float and move around in the bedroom and go right through the wall and disappear. And interestingly, it seemed to be associated with a very strange Bigfoot incident that happened to a member of the family. It's, I've said for years and years, Lon, when you begin to study these cases and study the people and the backgrounds of the people, you find that this phenomenon, I said for years, it's so strange it protects itself, because who's going to believe it?
Well, it's just like a lot of these cryptid cases where these things are seen just for glimpses or whatever, and then they disappear. I kind of put them in that multiverse category, that, maybe there's something that's showing up in our plane, our dimension, and then it goes away. That's the only way I can explain it, or, even classify it. Because it's there's no real way of saying that it was a flesh and blood type of being, and we get so many of these things.
Well, going back to the 1973, 1974 episodes that were going on here in Pennsylvania, it was just amazing, incredible time period.
Yeah.
And I had my teams back then, and we were responding 24 hours a day to these cases, and a lot of them. We were on the scene within minutes to hours after they occurred. And prior to that, I had looked into Bigfoot encounters. I had been aware of the history of Bigfoot in Pennsylvania going back to Native Americans and newspaper accounts in the 1800s talking about incidents in Pennsylvania. So things have been going on for a long time in the Keystone State. But I always felt, after interviewing witnesses, that if Bigfoot was real and appeared that there was something out there, that it was very likely some type of unknown primate. And I felt that for years and years, and I still keep an open mind to all possibilities. But as some of these cases unfolded in 1973, I should say 72, but really 73 is when things really, really began to get very, very strange. And then there have been a number of incidents ever since then. And I've been in touch with researchers throughout the country and around the world who have other very similar cases to what I've looked at here. Some of those cases in 73, I mean, we could really get into it if you want to. That's up to you. There's so much to talk about. But, as these cases are unfolding, you got to remember, back in those days, there wasn't any internet, there wasn't any cell phones. When people had something unusual happen or they were frightened by something, they called the police. So a lot of these calls were coming in the police departments, and these people were very serious. And we began to see a pattern where we would have a UFO sighting in one area, and within minutes, hours, or days later, we'd have a Bigfoot sighting or vice versa. And then we began to have those cases where we had a UFO and a Bigfoot seen together at the same time and place, including that famous incident back in October 25th of 1973 in Fayette County, which I'm sure we'll talk about a lot tonight, and it was outside of Uniontown. And that night about 10:30, I got a call from a state trooper. He had just come back from investigating this multiple witness UFO landing with two Bigfoot-type creatures in the field at the same time. And it's probably one of the strangest, most interesting, bizarre cases on record, which I'm sure you read about or familiar with, and it's a long story. But anyhow, that and then other cases that came to our attention, including that very interesting event, February 6, 1974, up in the mountains, up towards Ohio, up in Fayette County again, where the woman who lived deep in the mountains, that little cabin home, a woman who had lived there all her life, was a very good shot, and heard a commotion on her little porch because something was moving the pop cans. It was some pop cans on a little pile out there, and she had been having trouble with a pack of wild dogs previously and figured these dogs were back, so she grabbed her shotgun, loaded one round, and went over to the wall, switched on the light, opened the front door, and stepped out on the porch. But instead of any dogs, just a few feet away, with this huge, hairy creature with his arms straight up over its head. And, it's interesting. The many times I interviewed her, she never, ever called it a Bigfoot. She said it looked like a great big hairy ape. And what did she do? She fired right into that thing. And she said there was this bright flash of light, like a strobe on a camera, and it disappeared right in front of her. And then you had her in-laws that lived 100 feet away and heard the gunshot, and they called her on the phone and said what happened. She told them, and the son-in-law grabs a pistol, starts walking up towards her little cabin house, and he sees some figures walking up a dark road. As he gets close, he said he's surrounded by, I believe it was 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire, and starts shooting at him randomly and runs into the house. At about the same time, there's this large object, it's like a big Christmas ornament hovering over the woods.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when they called the state police. And, back at that time, as you recall, we had a major national trucker strike. There was gas rationing going on. And because of the violence and the shootings on the highway, back then the state police and the National Guard were patrolling together. So they both responded to this incident. And I couldn't get up there early the next morning because I couldn't get any gas. But, I talked to the chief investigating officer, and he said, I don't know what was going on up here, but something really weird was occurring. And he based that on the animal reactions, which, all the years I've been doing this, and I've mentioned this before, I have never seen a UFO or Bigfoot myself. I think I may have been to a Bigfoot on a couple occasions back in those days, but I never saw one. But I have seen, and others of my team back in those days did see the animal reactions. You can fool people, you can't fool the animals. And very commonly, especially with dogs, even the vicious, biggest dogs around, when these creatures were close by, they were completely changed animals. They were like paralyzed in fear. They wouldn't bark, they wouldn't move, they would cower, they would hide wherever they could. They wouldn't sometimes even eat properly for 2 or 3 days after the incident happened. And that reaction was seen that night by the police on the scene, and other animals in the field, cats in the house, even a little baby who was extremely, the people said in the house, that child just seemed so upset as if maybe it was sensing something, but it was crying and upset like I'd never been any time like that prior to it. So that's something that keeps showing up quite often. Even in more recent years, you keep getting animal reaction reports, and that's very interesting.
We were talking about floating entities, and yeah, you do have some listed in the book, but one in particular, because I saw the drawing, and it reminded me so much of the Flatwoods monster incident, that Salzburg UFO abduction case. Do you think there were any similarities between those two cases?
You know what? It's very interesting, but you know what also looked a lot like was the incident that happened, I believe, down at Mississippi, 1973. Do you remember with the 2 fishermen?
Yeah.
Gulf, Mississippi?
Yeah.
And they had the floating entity with, I believe, the claw-like hands.
Right.
That was interesting. And you remember a little bit ago we were talking about that floating entity in the house that occurred with a very strange Bigfoot case that I go into the Silent Invasion book and I talk about it. I have to go look up the details. It's been so long ago, but as I recall, the one person in the house had told her husband about seeing this creature, what it looked like, and it wasn't long after that news story broke about what the creatures the fishermen saw, and they were very similar to what she described to her husband.
Mm. Yeah, because I had never seen that drawing before, and when I was reading about it, I'm thinking, my God, that thing looks familiar. And
Yeah,
you're right, but that Mississippi case, I guess you could kind of put that in there as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
We were.
a lot of
Yeah, go ahead.
I
No,
was
go
going to
ahead.
say, a lot of the pictures in the book I've never published before, and that's the first time that I can recall ever publishing that sketch.
Yeah, I had never seen that. That was interesting.
Yeah.
Of course, and everybody else knows, have been reading Fans of Monsters about these dogmen or upright canid bipedal canid sightings that we've been getting recently. And you've had several of these canid sightings, but the one that interested me the most was the one in Bradford County, that werewolf sighting had back in 2012. Can you kind of go over that with us?
That's that case was one of the cases when I interviewed those people. This was a couple, and they had broken up in the meantime since the event happened, and it took me a while to get a hold of the girlfriend, and I finally did. I got a chance to interview them both in detail. They were both so shook up and upset over this thing. I mean, the man was very, very emotional over it, and but their stories were so identical of what happened that night. And if I have rarely ever come across any what I would really call werewolf reports, but I'm not sure what this thing was that they saw. But I'll be glad to go over some of that account. That happened actually November of 2011 outside of Troy, Pennsylvania, up in Bradford County.
Right.
And anyhow, it was about 11 o'clock that night when they were driving down what they called Mud Creek Road. And that was a very dark, narrow road, as I understand. And they're coming down the road, and all of a sudden, they see to the left side of the road what appears to be a naked man crawling on the side of the road. So the guy decreases speed and swerves his truck around in the middle of the road and directs his high beams of his headlights towards the subject. And the driver stops about 30 feet to 40 feet away, and they soon realize this was not a person, but instead a creature that was crawling very low to the ground. As they watched the creature move into a squatting position with its back completely straight, somewhat like the stance of a kangaroo. The arms of the creature were held tightly to its body. What looked like long claws resembled talons of an eagle were easily visible. The claws were estimated to be about 8 to 10 inches in length. One claw was shorter than the other three. The creature had a muscular body. The head of the beast appeared to be oversized and shaped like that of a wolf. At the top of the head, there were two pointed bat-like ears that looked to be about 4 to 6 inches long. The entire creature was covered with dull, wrinkly, dark black skin. And the man described seeing large canine-like teeth in its mouth. The eyes of the creature, about the size of a silver dollar, were shiny black. The man stated that even though he had his high beams directed at the creature, the eyes did not reflect at all. The man said he looked over the body during the 12-second encounter, and for some reason, though the creature, when he watched this thing, he thought that what he was seeing should have had wings for some reason, but none were apparent. In the squatting position, the creature seemed to be about 5 feet tall. But at this point, the creature walked in the left lane of the road and about 1 to 2 feet onto the pavement. As the couple watched in amazement, the creature began to stretch its body. The man said at that point the animal started to stand up on its back legs while also falling over on its front feet. The driver said that in that position the creature seemed to be 6 to 7 feet tall. The animal then fell over on all fours. The witness observed that the front claws of the creature were now 2 feet across the center line of the highway, while the back feet remained 1 to 2 feet from the edge of the road. The creature then turns its head to the right and looked towards the vehicle. Now, this is interesting, and we talked about this again. What the comment is, the driver told me that it looked directly at them with a horrific expression like it was panicked. The fellow saw it take a deep breath. He had the feeling that the creature didn't realize that it was being observed, and when it realized it was like it was caught doing something. Once it realized it was being observed, it leaned back slightly, then reached forward with its claws. The creature then took one tremendous leap, clearing a 7-foot embankment, and moved out of sight into the woods. The man's leap was about 40 feet long. As it was in the process of leaping, it was perfectly straight and held its front claws forward. The legs, as it was leaping, were only slightly larger than broomsticks, or about the size of a walking crane, and were very long. Then, just a second after the creature was gone from sight, something else really odd happened. A large bird, possibly an owl, suddenly rushed at the passenger side window, almost hitting the glass, then took off and did not return. It happened so fast they aren't sure if it was an owl or not. The witnesses indicated this creature appeared to be changing form. The driver said its shape was nothing like when it was squatted. The woman stated to me that it shaped into another form. She thought it was a little dark brown color and looked like a werewolf with a little back hair. She estimated that when it was leaping into the woods, she thought it stood about 9 feet tall. The woman, while reluctant to say it, said, "I think it was a man changed into a werewolf."
Wow.
Just a really interesting case. And when you talk to people and you heard their emotions and described this in detail, it was really amazing.
Incredible.
Well, what fascinates me with this one in particular, but, you and I had talked about this the last time you were on, is how some of these cryptids, and mostly we're talking about Bigfoot, show a lot of human reaction to certain things. Like, we were talking about when people, when the people are noticing it, when they look at it and they can tell that the person sees it, it kind of reacts like it's surprised.
Yeah.
And now this werewolf, where it was, had like a human reaction as well. If it was a shapeshifter, well, then so be it. But some of these cryptids are so interesting that they do show like a human reaction to things.
Oh yeah, and the one case other than a Bigfoot was an incident that I looked into. It happened in the fall of 2007 down in West Virginia, down near Clendenin. And this was a very interesting thunderbird sighting, or a giant winged cryptid. And this happened about 8 o'clock in the morning. It was a 2-lane rural road outside of Clendenin, West Virginia. And the man was riding down the road when he suddenly had to hit the brakes because there's this huge bird only a few yards ahead on the road eating roadkill. There you go again with your roadkill.
Mm-hmm.
The man was startled by the size of the creature, and it stood at least 4 feet tall, and its head extended above the roofline of the vehicle. The head was dominant, was not overly proportioned to the body. The head was featherless, separated from the rest of the body by a prominent yellowish-orange collar of plumage. The body was covered with dark brown or black feathers, which, by the way, is very common with a lot of the giant bird reports. The beak appeared dark and was quite large and long. The eyes were dark in color. The witness did not recall much detail about the feet. However, the legs were covered in feathers, but the feet were bare. The chest of the giant fowl was distinct and that it was well-formed. The witness pointed out the most striking feature was the massive wingspan, which is easily as wide as a 2-lane road. The man actually went back to the site and measured the distance of the roadway from edge to edge. It was 21 feet across.
Mm.
The witness stated the wings were, as I can remember, as arms of a human are attached. It had shoulders, it had very muscular upper torso, and the wings were as if they were its arms. But the driver said, "We both startled each other, it seems, for it looked as shocked as I was. When the bird became startled, it pulled its head back to stare at the driver. The bird then ran from the car as if it was going to fly in an awkward manner. It ran jumping from one foot to the other in a hopping manner while flapping its wings to gain speed for takeoff. The witness said it was similar to a jumping, hopping run, and it moved about 5 yards. Then with its huge wings, the thing finally lifted off the road and went up over the hill." But the man said the wingtips were stirring up the dust and gravel on both sides of the road as it ran and became airborne. So that's where he could measure it because he could see the wingtips right touching the edge of the road, and it was 21 feet across. And when he did some research, he went to the library, and he said the closest thing he could find was a picture of an extinct paratorn.
Well, there you go.
So,
Wow.
the whole thing is, as you said and I've said, where do these things come from and where do they go? It seems as though in some of these events, these things seem to have the ability that they come into our physical reality, they look physically solid, they can at times leave physical evidence, and then they're gone.
Yeah. I I kind of had to subscribe to that multiverse explanation. I can't be specific because I have no idea where they're coming from. But is there a possibility that they're coming from another dimension? Yeah, it may be, or another alternate universe. It's very possible.
Yeah, and just like as that woman was describing with that skinny floating entity in Butler County, it was hard for her to try to even explain what she saw. But as I mentioned in other cases, and we've discussed some other cases over years, some of these things, even with some of the Bigfoot cases, there are instances where these things are not completely physically solid. There have been cases where people only saw parts of the torso of the body. There was not a complete creature, as weird as it sounds. They're very far and few between. Some of these things, again, they suddenly appear and disappear. There's odd cases going back years and years, not in Pennsylvania, but I knew other researchers that looked at some of these cases where these things was physically changed, allegedly, into another form. And it's so strange and unusual. And the one case I mentioned in my my new book, The Astonishing Encounters, is a case I got to know the witness very well. He was a great guy. He passed away a number of years ago. This was up in Cambria County, outside of Johnstown, and it was a really detailed two-witness Bigfoot encounter back in 1995 around 422 outside of Revlock, and very detailed description of this Bigfoot walking. But interestingly, as the witness describing, he's talking about its, the size of this thing and how it's moving with its long arms going up the hill. And then he states that the chest area of the animal was wide and deep, but the lower half of the body appeared to be slightly out of focus. That out-of-phase appearance followed the creature as it walked. The witness stressed that it was not fog and that it was a clear night at the time of the observation. So here you go again. It seems as though maybe it was a process of materializing, dematerializing. Who knows?
Oh, by the way, I don't know if you realize this or not. You mentioned Cambria County. Now, we've had 3 Dogman reports come out of Portage, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And all 3 of them were in that town park. And I think, well, now the one was a case that somebody else had mentioned, but the two other ones were witnesses that our investigators talked to. And they've all been going on now just within the last maybe 2-3 years.
Yep.
So,
and that's also same general area where there's been a lot of historical Bigfoot activity going on, going back
Oh, really?
to at least the 70s and in the last few years as well. So I'm hearing that. I've talked to a lot of witnesses over the last several years who have had Bigfoot encounters up there. So once again, it has a lot to do with how far you were from the creature, the lighting, a lot of different things. Not everybody may have seen some of the details that other people did.
Yeah. Wow.
So we were talking about that earlier. How many of these Bigfoot sightings could actually be misinterpreted, quote unquote, Dogman sightings?
Well, even vice versa. Why not? You're right. That might be a good case of it there in Portage. From what I understand now, I don't know if you've been in the area before, Stan, but I was told that behind that park there's there are a lot of caves in that area.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a lot of caves throughout that area and throughout that part of Pennsylvania, Southwest PA. It's covered with caves. I can tell you this: back again during the 70s when all this activity was going on, and we have reports of these things on occasion going near caves or mines, and we searched many of those caves and mines at the time, but never found any evidence that these creatures were staying inside of there. They may have gone in there temporarily, but they weren't staying in there anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you because I didn't know, I didn't know if you had known about that, but apparently you all had checked that out. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of caves, a lot of mining in there and all, and I thought, well, maybe there's a possibility that these things are staying in there. It may still be yet, but that's interesting. That's interesting that these cryptid cases are showing up in the same areas like that. Um, Now you had directed me to a report that was sent to you out of Denver, Colorado. Well, it was Lakewood, Colorado, and then you forwarded it to me. Then those guys looked in, and JC and Jack Carey looked into this. And I tell you, now I know you talked to the witness, and I talked to the witness, and of course Jack and JC talked. One of the best witnesses we ever had.
Very
I've ever
credible.
had.
Yeah.
Very credible.
Yeah.
And this guy was, he's a professional guy. He didn't want his name and stuff going out there, but I tell you, the way he described things, the way he described the incident, the actual description of this thing, boy, you just wish you could get more of those like that. And they're still checking out there. There's definitely something going on out there.
Oh yeah, I deal with this all the time.
Yeah.
People are so reluctant to, even today, people are so reluctant to want to use their name. Some of them don't want me to give out the exact location where these things took place for various reasons. They're just, it's something I found long ago, and I'm sure you have too, that some of the best witnesses are people who never would believe these things exist until they had their own personal experience.
Absolutely.
And many of these people, it's a life-changing event. I mean, some witnesses I'm still in touch with from probably 20, 30 years ago. And some of these people today, they still can't deal with what they encountered so many years ago.
Well, I just look at myself, what I saw, I didn't believe what it was. And I really didn't know, I really still don't know what it was. But, it got the ball rolling with me. So, I had to keep digging and trying to find out what it was I actually saw. But, there was a case, a sighting that I had reported on that you went into detail in the book, and I'd like for you to talk about it. It was Jonathan Fennell, out in Butler County, and this is at Butler County Ferry.
Yeah, that was a great story.
Oh man, and the way he described it and everything, because he did do the sketch. But it was really, I thought it was a fantastic description in the way he went back, because there was multiple witnesses and such. Talk to it about that, and I'd like to get your take on that situation.
I got the story, as I mentioned to you. I first heard of it through your website, through your blog. Then I was able to contact Jonathan, and we communicated about it, and he gave me permission to reuse it in the book. And I've heard stories of these small little winged entities, fairy reports, and I was really kind of not really accepting these type of things. It was really hard for me, but you know what? Maybe we're dealing with something that can take on any form it wants to. If we're dealing with something that's 7, 8 foot tall and hairy, and we're dealing with giant flying things, why couldn't you have something like this? But in the last few years, I've had a number of other people approach me and tell me stories of very similar encounters with these fairy-like creatures. And what his encounter and his detailed description in the account that he wrote, it was so amazing that that's why I was interested in putting it in the book, because it was so different.
Yeah, when he first told me about it, he was kind of reluctant about me putting it out there. And then he started sending the sketches. And I begged him. I said, "Look, man, this has got to get out." I said, "You're in an area anyway it's a hot area. I mean, there's a lot of stuff being seen out there." And in fact, it wasn't too long ago that somebody said that they had a gnome sighting out in Butler County. Oh God, I'm trying to remember who the investigator was. Oh, it was Linda Howe. And you know, that's something else for people. But you're right; these little people sightings are do pop up once in a while. And of course, I'm like you at first. I really got to question them. And but his description was so amazing. And it basically were they were on the deck of the house, and some one evening, and this thing kind of popped up out of a planter or something on the porch, and they all got
Yeah.
a good look at this thing.
Yeah, it was right there, fluttering right in front of them, and they got a great detailed look at this thing, and it was very intriguing.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
And the other thing that's very curious is that winged humanoid case we had up in Butler County
Mhm.
back in March of 2011.
Yeah, the
That
gargoyle.
was an interesting case. I don't
Yeah.
know if you remember that or not, where the leathery creature with the wings tucked in the side walked out in front of the car.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I do.
It was up there
Yeah.
between Fort and East Grady.
Well,
And,
there's in fact that was seen twice, wasn't it?
Well, it was seen. Apparently, this guy reported it, but Dan Hagman has that BORU, the research group up there in Butler, and he
Right.
received several reports from different people within the same time period in the same area who saw it.
Yeah.
And that was very interesting. I've been in touch with that witness ever since it happened, and
Yeah.
got to know him pretty well. And I mean, he's a very credible person, and there's just a lot of weird stuff going on. I've been hearing reports for the last year of Bigfoot activity up in that general area, and a lot of UFO activity, and just weird stuff going on.
Well, we had a dog man up there. Their graveyard up there in oh god, it was Amy. Sean. Amy had this dog
Amy
man
Lane.
encounter up there in the cemetery where her daughter had seen it and such, and she told me about it. Now there was just a quick glimpse of it, but I know it freaked her daughter out, and the dog in the car freaked out as well. So it was something they saw, or something showed up, and I guess that was Butler County as well. So yeah, well, Butler County, it's just what can you say?
I've been up in that area since the late 1960s investigating incidents.
Yeah,
It was an area where there was a lot of UFO activity. There was reports of UFO landings and humanoid entities seen back in those days.
yeah.
Here's an interesting story you probably never heard of before. I was aware of it with a group I was working with back in those days, and this is a lot going back many years with memory, but they were getting calls in the outside Aurora area, reports of these big radio communication towers at night that would rise up, and they would have these hover discs come down and hover around the radio towers at night, but they were not there in the daytime. And there were, some of the guys involved, these guys were engineers or whatever, and they were checking the navigational and the aeronautical maps and interviewing people, and you couldn't see them in the daytime. And they tried to triangulate it at night, and you could see them, but they could never get to them. And I saw pictures of some of the radio towers that they had taken, but they were never could be located where they were originating from. And there were a lot of UFO sightings going on for apparently months up there around these towers that didn't exist, but they did exist apparently.
Mm-hmm. Well, we were you were talking about flying humanoids as well, and Pennsylvania has had its share of Mothman type sightings as well. I guess maybe the most intriguing one was the one in '66 up near Pittsburgh. Go ahead,
It's interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting case. I believe this is the first time anybody ever published a story about it, and that was in November '66, during the same time that the Mothman creature was terrifying residents down around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and making the news around the country. And I had heard rumors circulating around the Pittsburgh area that something strange, some kind of strange creature had been seen, and all kind of rumors going around. Something was, had harmed somebody, but you couldn't ever track it down. And then years later, I was able to find a person who was directly involved in the incident. And so it's a very, very fascinating story of this thing that was seen in this large wooded area, and apparently it was a big hush-hush in the area. The police and everybody kept it very, very quiet. Allegedly, after, I guess, several weeks of this thing being seen and scaring a lot of people, people claim to have seen Air Force marked blockades on the roads around some of those rural roads going into that wooded area for a period of time. Can't confirm that. That's what I was told. And this huge, hairy, feathery thing was apparently scaring a lot of people around that part of the Allegheny County back in those days.
Well, I mean, it's nothing new to me. I mean, of course, I've had this encounter with in '88 up there outside New Oxford, Pennsylvania, which is in Adams County, and they've seen it as the Conewago Creek, as it empties goes east into the Susquehanna River, so that goes into York County. But then a couple weeks ago, we had another sighting of something in Adams County in Littlestown, near the Pennsylvania line, Maryland-Pennsylvania line, that I just don't know what it was.
I don't have a
yeah, I don't know. I mean, in the way it was described, now, of course, it was described like this, no feathers and kind of the membrane type wings like a bat would have, but they were huge, and they kind of said it looked like a butterfly, even though one of the girls, there was 3 witnesses, one of the girls said it kind of looked like an angel's wing without feathers. But they didn't have a head on it, or it was real cropped close to the shoulders, and it was kind of lightish color, a lightish pinkish white hue, or whatever it was. So I have no idea what they saw. Now I haven't been up there, and I haven't talked again to the witnesses, but I haven't heard anything. But I think the thing was moving down toward Maryland. Just, because it was so near the line, you know what I'm saying? And there's not really a whole lot of woods in there. If it was hiding somewhere, they didn't have a lot of places to hide. So, but there again, maybe this is something that just popped in and popped out. But yeah, Pennsylvania has its share of flying humanoids. There's no doubt about that. And but I think there's a lot more out there for people that people are seeing, and it's just not getting reported.
Well, people, they're very reluctant to report it. I mean, sometimes I'll get reports in from 20, 30 years ago, and I'm sure you do as well.
Oh, yeah.
Or they don't know where to report to. There's a lot of places you can report UFO sightings, but a lot of people wonder where they can report seeing some of these cryptid reports. And I find today that people are more willing to report UFOs, but they're still extremely hesitant to report having encounters with these strange creatures.
Yeah. Well, there's another report in here that I thought was interesting, with the giant insects in Mount Pleasant Township.
Oh, not the insects.
Oh yeah, here we go, insectoids again. What do you make of that one, Stan? Was this insectoid thing like the mantis? Was it described like that, or what do you think?
I think the one you're referring to, that was actually what they were saying was some kind of, looked like oversized caterpillars. Is that the one you're talking about? Yeah,
oversized caterpillars. Yeah, I just noticed it. Yeah, there you are. Yeah, what is up with that? That
was back in 2009. And again, that's an area where there's a lot of history, a lot of weird things going on. And these people were driving down this road in Mount Pleasant Township, and they saw something strange crawling across the road ahead of them, and they said it looked like a giant caterpillar. The oversized insect crawled from right to left across the road, described as about 7 inches in length from tip to tip, appeared to be segmented and moved like a grub, but it was primarily an iridescent white color with a bluish tint. But witnesses emphasized that it was not glowing. The creature showed no signs of legs or feet, had no apparent head or tail. The body was skinnier at the ends and fatter in the center of the body. And as they continued driving, just seconds later, a second similar-looking creature was observed as it moved from right to left, then reversed direction on the road. And the car of people who were startled, they said within a very short distance, observed a total of 6 or 7 similar creatures, some on the road while others along the side of the road. One of the last ones they saw was in the middle of the road in front of the witnesses, which they drove over, but they did not hit it. The driver refused to slow down and take a closer look for what these things were. So, I don't know. It's just like one of those oddball reports.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yeah, one thing, Lon, that I noticed and I thought might really be important years and years ago, and I'm seeing it in more recent reports of cryptids and UFOs, is that you keep consistently seeing, and I noticed this back at least in the early 70s, and it's continued on, as many low-level, close-range UFO encounters and many very close-range cryptid encounters, Bigfoot, Thunderbirds, Black Panthers, other weird entities, occur in the vicinity of high-energy sources.
Yeah.
So a lot of them occur around power plants, high-tension power lines, radio communication towers, gas wells, gas lines, railroad tracks, reservoirs, sources of energy. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I really believe somehow, and I don't understand exactly how it works, but I believe there's an energy connection to a lot of the phenomena we're dealing with.
Well, I agree with you. You know, kind of getting off track, I mean, you look at the Tide Seas incident and where that supposed craft was over the power lines, and both witnesses stated that it seemed like it was taking some type of energy off of those power lines. Well, you know, more recently, there have been 2 or 3 other sightings of UFOs on that same power line within like a mile of that ridge. So, I mean, are they being drawn there because of the high power? Who knows?
Yeah.
It's a thought.
Exactly.
It's interesting.
Speaking of UFOs, Stan, what's recent in UFO sightings in PA?
There have been a lot of interesting reports over the last several months. It seems like from August through September, we've had some steady reports coming in. One was outside of Pittsburgh in a little area called Springdale, September 1st, and that was around 10:30 at night when a witness observed this very bright light moving towards the west. Now, this person was extremely familiar with medical helicopters in the area, and the sound was very loud, but it was unlike that of a medical helicopter or other propeller-driven aircraft, like a military helicopter. Didn't sound like a jet engine, and the light was low in altitude, maybe around 1,000 feet up, they estimated. It was so bright and huge as it passed overhead, they were able to determine that it definitely was not a helicopter. The witness looked up and observed the bottom of a very large boomerang-shaped object. There were what appeared to be evenly spaced dim white spotlights along the edge of the underside of the object. The lights each had a pale yellow tinge were non-blinking. The underbelly of the object had a greenish tinge to it, something like the color of an avocado. The object continued to emit this loud noise as it moved towards the east, then it banked towards the south and quickly moved out of sight. And the witnesses still baffled by what they saw. Another odd case was up in Cambria County again. This was August 28th, and about 9:50 when a group of people were outside near Johnstown. And these people were very familiar with aircraft because a lot of planes continually fly out of the John Murtha Johnstown Cambria Airport up there. So they're really familiar with the aircraft. And they see this series of lights that appear to be attached to an object, but there was no defined shape. What was observed appeared to be in the altitude of a small aircraft such as Piper Cub ascending from the airport, moving towards the direction of Pittsburgh. Saw a bright red, non-blinking light in the center that looked to be elongated. On each side of the red light was a non-blinking, cream-colored light. As the lights passed overhead, they heard absolutely no sound. The witnesses ran out towards the driveway to follow the path of the object as it moved out of sight, and it was moving actually towards, it would be towards the west, out towards the Laurel Ridge near Ligonier, which right there is your hotbed, going out towards the Chestnut Ridge, which is one of the most active places in the country year after year for phenomena. UFO sightings, Bigfoot, other cryptid encounters, all kind of weird phenomena reported along the ridge. But anyhow, in the distance, at that point, the object looked different, and they said it looked something that looked like a clear bubble with a fuzzy-looking outside edge. But the interesting thing is, as they're watching, suddenly the object, which is high in the sky, drops straight down from the sky towards the ground. And they're sitting there expecting to hear an impact or explosion, but they heard and saw nothing after that. So that's very interesting because I believe I've had one, maybe two reports last year of something similar hit high in the sky and then dropping straight down. There's one case I have, and I'm going from memory again. This is April 2013. This was actually in that general area near Latrobe, where several witnesses were looking further west in the distance, and they saw, as I recall, it was like a black fuselage of a helicopter with no blades, but it was dropping straight down out of the sky, straight towards the ground from a high altitude. It had lights along the side of it, and two military jets came in from two different directions, and they both approached the object, and the witnesses were pretty far away, and they couldn't tell exactly what happened, but the one jet looked like it either fired on it or somehow touched it, because at the moment that happened, that black fuselage-shaped thing began to spin faster and faster and was dropping faster towards the ground, far in the distance, but we never had any reports of any crashes. So just strange stuff.
Hey, we got a question. We got a question, Stan. These creature reports, any of them that you've had, has there been any aggression shown toward the witnesses at all?
You know, it's nothing that's that common, especially with all the Bigfoot cases. I mean, I've looked into hundreds of Bigfoot reports going back to the late 60s, and as so many witnesses told me, that if these things wanted to hurt them, especially from hunters, these things easily could have outrun them, could have hurt them badly, but they don't seem to be aggressive towards people. They seem to be very curious of human activity. They seem to be curious, you know, of even youngsters, but not in any way harming them. But we've had cases over the years, and it's been years ago, but we had some cases where they should be very curious of maybe like very young children, like babies crying, maybe because they made a similar sound. Because as you're aware, with some of the Bigfoot cases we had over the years, they seem to make a number of different prominent sounds. One is like a woman screaming, one's like a baby crying, one's like a high-pitched whistle, another one very common in which we taped the sound some nights when we were staking out back in those days. It's like somebody with asthma, like very heavy, deep breathing, like they can't catch their breath. In fact, one night on a farm in Derry Township, which has a long history of these ongoing Bigfoot reports, and during 73, these things were there, you know, reportedly quite often. We were staking out farms in different areas where these things have been seen, and I got a call from this one farm that this thing had just been at the farm in the barn, and there were very strange three-toed footprints in the barn. The animals were very fearful, just like we mentioned, and they had a big cornfield, and it was dark, and something very heavy was running ahead of us in the cornfield, making that very loud sound like someone with asthma, and we chased after it, and we could never catch up to whatever it was.
Now, I think particular dog man or the bipedal canine, the question is, are the yellow and amber eyes, is that fairly prevalent in these cases or these reports?
They're not common in all reports. There are some very interesting cases where these things reportedly have self-luminescent glowing eyes, and interestingly, they weren't occurring where you had a lot of reflective light. You didn't have a bright moon that night. You didn't have any lights in the air to reflect and glare. Some of these cases, they were glowing, your typical kind of amber, reddish orange. Some very bright green colored, like the creatures were seen in the field that night in Uniontown. They had the bright green glowing eyes.
Right.
I've had cases where these creatures would change the direction of their head, and the eye color would change from one color to the other. And it's just amazing what you can learn. It's just like with the smell. There is not always an odor attributed with Bigfoot. Yes, in many cases, there's that putrid smell, which I have smelled, but in some cases, there is no smell whatsoever. I've got a theory on that, and I don't know exactly how it fits in, but my theory for years is that the smell somehow is involved with the process of these things coming into our physical reality, becoming into that physical state or appearing and disappearing. And it's just a theory.
That's interesting. That is interesting. I never even thought about that. Yeah, well, that is interesting. God, you just kind of threw me one there. I didn't even think about that. I guess that could be for any cryptid, I guess. Some type of physical manifestation could be caused when it moves in and out, or when it comes in to our plane. Maybe there's something. Maybe there's something to that. I never even thought about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I was just going to mention something to you. I lost my trend of thought, so we'll think about it here in a minute.
I hate when that happens.
Me too. I know. Well,
that's what happens when you get old.
Oh my God! Don't say that. I hear the same thing. My son says that to me. I said, telling him. I said, well, you'll find out one day.
I know one I wanted to mention to you. When you're out there in the field and you spent days and nights and years doing this, you hear a lot of interesting little tidbits. And we found something years ago that witnesses kept bringing up. And you don't hear about it very often, but on occasion I have people still bring it up because they don't know how it relates, and nor do I. But people who are having Bigfoot sightings and sometimes reoccurring sightings on their property were reporting what sounded like tearing metal or metal on metal sound when these things were around.
Yeah, you mentioned that down in Point Pleasant. We were at the Mothman Festival about the tearing of the metal, and I thought that interesting because it's not something I was aware of.
What do you think that is, Stan?
I really don't know. I don't know how it relates to it, but it's very interesting. And we've got a lot of these interesting tidbits down there around Derry Township. Excuse me, out around the ridge. Again, back in the 70s, and then I had that really weird case that happened back in March of '97. I wrote about in my Real and Mysterious Pennsylvania book. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I don't have a question.
Oh, okay. I thought I heard somebody say something.
No.
Okay, but this was a case where early morning hours, I believe it was around 3:00 in the morning, out in Derry Township. This is a very rural area. These fellows work of night, and they were coming through the area, and I think it was a little van, and they lost an expensive hubcap, and it rolled across the road into an area over there which had a bunch of old car bodies laying around.
Mm-hmm.
And the one fellow stayed in the vehicle. In fact, he had a walkie-talkie or something. He was just checking out. They had bought some walkie-talkies, and the other two guys were out in the field, and they took a walkie-talkie with them, as I recall. And they were walking around out there, and anyhow, they also heard that, like, metal on metal. That's one of the cases that brought that up. Mm-hmm. And they're also hearing the noise, and they are in shock, because what they see is not a dog, but a huge white hair-covered ape-like creature rising up from the ground. And the one guy is panicking. He runs out of there, and the other guy stood there for several seconds trying to get a better look at this thing to figure out what he's seeing, and he finally runs off. And I think he radioed to the guy, hurry up, start the engine. Well, the one guy running out of there, I believe he dropped a set of keys, and he had his dad's really really good knife or something. It was a special knife they didn't want to lose, but he dropped it on the scene when they were running. So they went back out there, and they got out of that area really quick. Well, here's the interesting little bit. As they're riding down this country road, 3 o'clock in the morning, they're leaving that area very quickly, and all of a sudden, coming from the opposite direction, is this upscale red and silver Chevy dually truck that passes them in the opposite direction at a really fast rate of speed. And they watched as this dually pulls off on the side road and turns around and begins to follow them down the road. And this Chevy truck increased its speed and came up right on the rear bumper of their vehicle, kept that position for about half a mile, and each man in the car had the feeling that whoever was in the truck was trying to obtain their license number. And the truck finally stopped abruptly in the road, started backing up, turned off its lights, and backed onto a side road. When the 3 witnesses continued on to their residence. So one guy lived not too far from her down the road, and I don't remember if it was him or one of the other fellows, one of the other fellows that dropped the knife and the keys, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to go back to the site later on. Well, the one guy said he's not going back. So he and another guy, they go back down there. Now, this guy has a very nice car at the time that was modified with a high-speed engine for racing. So he put a lot of money into his vehicle. And they go out to that scene, and they had one of those 12-volt high-powered spotlights. So they're shining it all around, looking on the ground, and shining around those car bar things that are there. And suddenly, the creature comes around the corner. And they hit the beam of light directly on the creature, and they get a really good look at this thing. And the blinding light was concentrated on the head, and the beast appeared to be getting agitated by the concentrated bright beam. Walking upright on 2 legs, began to chase the car down the road, got within about 3 feet from the rear bumper, and continued to follow them for a short distance as they pulled away down the road. So anyhow, and it gets even better. So as they're watching this, they said this thing first stooped and later down was on all fours and was walking upright like a man. The sound of something heavy was apparent when the creature moved across the ground. And they were going in the description of this thing, how big it was. The eyes seemed to be pinkish in color, appeared almost egg-shaped. And anyhow, so there's a third time when the guy goes back by himself, the guy with the high-powered vehicle, because he's the one who lost the keys and the knife. And he pulls in the area to start. He opens his door and he sees the keys. He's afraid to get out. He just reaches down and grabs the keys. Then all of a sudden, I'm trying to remember all the details here. There's a big thump towards the rear of his car. He looks into the rearview mirror and shocked to see that this huge hairy creature is leaning on the back of the car, peering at him through the rear window. Its eyes seem to have a reddish glow. The driver pushed down hard on the gas, trying to quickly exit the area, but the car wouldn't move. As the man continues to hit the gas, the sound from his tailpipes is getting so loud by the moment, and suddenly the creature was no longer in the car. He was able to make a quick getaway. And the man felt certain that it was the car's high-pitched noise that finally made the creature leave the vehicle. The man later, after that happened, he ran down the road. There was a little one of those 24-hour convenience stores, and he just stopped there and get a coffee just to try to recover from what happened. And he had his eye on the car, and of course that time in the morning there were few people around, but a carload of teenagers pulled up near his car, and they were going over there and apparently admiring his car, and he's walking out the door, and several of the guys mentioned what a nice car it was, and one of the guys still telling me about, were you attacked by some kind of an animal? And the man looked, and on the back of the car, and in the back of the car, there were these deep scratches cut into the metal and the paint as a rear vehicle, and there was like 2 very long scratches.
Mm-hmm.
And anyhow, there's a picture of it in the book, and it got more interesting because I got a call about around 3:34 in the morning. I can't remember exactly when it was, very early morning hours, and found out what happened, interviewed a couple of witnesses, told them I want to meet with them as soon as I could that day, and I made plans to go out and meet them, take pictures, photographs, whatever, which I did. And the the interesting little thing came up because one of the key witnesses didn't show up that day, and I said to his buddy, well, he was supposed to meet me, and he said, well, he was a little hesitant to meet you, but he later did, and he went on to say that about 10 minutes after I had talked to him on the phone, he received a disturbing phone call. And he said the best he can remember, it was a fellow that said something about that he was with the FBI, and he said about the incident last night, forget about what you saw, and I strongly suggest that you don't talk any further with Stan Gordon.
Troublemaker.
Wow.
And anyhow, that was interesting. The guy later met with me, and the other fellow who still lived with his parents, apparently that day, two Chevy Caprices, which the government, the law enforcement people used to use quite a bit back in those days, two men in each vehicle showed up at his house and wanted to talk to him about the incident, and I guess he was left with a similar message. And anyhow, it was a very, very intriguing case. I did write to the FBI, and because I was interested to see if they may have been involved. We have no way to confirm if they were, but they never contacted me, which I thought was a little unusual. And anyhow, it was a very interesting case. The whole thing is, how did they know about the incident? How did they know these guys were involved? It was either they got their license number and were tracing the phone, or were they possibly already listening to some of the conversations that were coming into my house, which there have been indications of that over the years with some of the incidents I worked on, which I'm reluctant to say, but there were other people that were able to confirm what was happening over the years.
Well, welcome to the club. I've had it happen too.
Just give me a heads up when we.
I had him come to the door. In fact, one occasion. Yeah, I mean, you know, you hear this, and I heard somebody talking about it on the radio the other night about the government knowing about these, about these cryptids, in particular these Bigfoot type creatures. They know about it. I mean, come on, how couldn't they know about it? And they're protective of it, the information, and it doesn't seem to bother them when certain reports and such come out. But boy, I'm telling you, if the right one comes out, they're going to hop on it. They're going to try to stop it.
Well, I've seen indication for many years that the government has an interest in both UFO and Bigfoot cases.
Yeah.
And there is no doubt that in some of the cases I was involved in, some of them were really spectacular events, that there was indications that there was a government involvement in some of those cases later on. Going way back to that case, the UFO landing case in October 73 in Uniontown.
Mm-hmm.
That was just an amazing case, and there was some oddball aspects to it, including the fact that, years after that event happened, like in some of these important cases, we would quite often keep in touch with witnesses and keep in contact with them for years, just to see if anything else had happened or anything new took place. And on a follow-up back to probably about the 1980s, and that happened in 73, my assistant George Lutz and I went up to follow up with the key eyewitness. We never ever hypnotized him, and again, we don't have time to get into the whole story, but Dr. Berthold Schwartz was a famous psychiatrist at the time who was interested in these cases. He spent a week up here on his own time interviewing all the witnesses and the state trooper and the people who were involved. And he went away convinced these people are all telling the truth. But he recommended not to do any hypnosis at that time. Years later, situation changed a little, and we just considered the possibility, because we had some professionals in our group who were well trained to do that type of thing. And we just talked to the witness, Steve, and we just said, we were trying to see if he had an interest in it. And he looked at myself and George very strange, and he said, "Why do you want to hypnotize me again?" And we looked like, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, an incident happened to him within a week or two after the actual event happened, because, my team was up there quite often doing interviews with him and other people and doing investigation for weeks. And these two men who visited him, he always thought they were somehow part of my research group, but they weren't. I guess he knew that my assistant George was a major in the Air Force Reserves, but of course he never wore his Air Force uniform when we were out on investigations. And anyhow, he told us that these two men came to the house. One man was in a dark suit. The other man was in an Air Force uniform, and the guy in the Air Force uniform was carrying a briefcase. And they wanted to interview him, and they wanted him to recall all the information about what he saw in the field, what the creatures looked like, describe the UFO. And then, interestingly, the Air Force guy opens his briefcase and pulls out a bunch of pictures. There's pictures of both Bigfoot and UFOs. And they wanted to know if any of the Bigfoot pictures looked similar to what he saw. And I remember him telling me one specific picture was a Bigfoot carrying, I believe it was a dead pig, over a fence from Georgia. And they wanted to know if it looked similar to what he saw.
Mm-hmm.
And for other UFO pictures they saw, and they wanted to know if it looked similar. And then, as they continued the research, the investigation, they asked permission if they could hypnotize him, and apparently they did. And after it was all over, the guys said that they would be in touch with him, and he never heard from them again. And, of course, I sent requests to the Air Force, but you got to remember, the government, the Air Force, was officially out of UFO research actually in January of 1970 when they closed
Project Blue Book was done.
Right. So who these guys were, we don't know. I can also tell you that there was no doubt there was some other government interest in our investigations at the time. I had received a phone call during the really active time in '73 from a man who told me he was working for the government, that they were aware of the investigation we were doing. I was provided a phone number, a Washington, D.C. phone number for a laboratory, the name of a contact and address there, in the event that we would come up with a body or any really conclusive evidence, which we didn't have enough to really work with, and I never called it. But later on, it wasn't long after that, I did have a call from a government representative's office, and two of those government people did come to my house, and we had long conversations, and I got to know them quite well, and we kept in touch for many, many years. And they were very open-minded to what we were doing. They were very helpful. They were very interested in what was going on. They wanted to be kept updated, which they were. But they were also, I gave them the phone number that I was provided, and they confirmed that it was an actual government phone number in Washington.
Wow. Well, Stan, I think we're going to wrap it up. And how can people get in touch with you?
Well, they can get in touch with me through my website, which is www.stangordon.info, I-N-F-O. They can call me. I deal mainly in PA calls, but I get calls from all over the country and out of the country sometimes. My number is 724-838-7768. My books are all available now at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, or other booksellers. And the new book is just out recently, as you mentioned. It's called Astonishing Encounters, Pennsylvania's Unknown Creatures, and it has some very interesting, very strange reports in there.
And I have it.
Yeah, it's very interesting as well. Absolutely. Stan, as always, thanks for joining us, man. It's always a pleasure having you on with us.
Always.
And I appreciate you having me. Thanks, guys.
Our pleasure, Stan.
Take
Thanks
care
for
now.
calling.
Right, good night.
Stan Gordon. Doesn't get any better than that one.
Well, it's interesting that he's had some involvement with the, I don't say Men in Black, but government people, and it happens, man. I'm telling you.
Don't we know? We've been talking
It has
about a couple
happened
things
to me. It's
offline.
happened to others, and yeah, I mean, it happens.
It does.
Yep. So let's see. Next week, we have Mike Ricksecker on with us. He's an author, paranormal author, and he's what he considers himself as a ghostorian, a ghost historian. And we're gonna talk about some spooky stuff. Rick's from, I think he's actually living in Maryland. He's written a book about some of the crazy stuff that goes on in this state where I live at. And we're going to be talking about the spooks next week, and it should be interesting.
Going to be a great show. And folks, better sound this week here on Arcane Radio, thanks to our good friend and sound guy, Dustin Kinley. And we're very grateful for his assistance, who's going to be sitting in the studio with us each and every week when he can to make sure we sound as lovely as we do tonight. Lon, thanks for joining us tonight and being our wearer of all hats, I guess, the man who keeps it going. And folks, we'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening to Arcane Radio. Good night.
Take care.